From Thom Hartmann's Daily Take Substack, The Cruelty Machine, Inside Trump's America, where pain is policy and fear is the fuel. Trump has built a movement that glorifies cruelty and cloaks greed in the language of patriotism and faith. Published July 31st, 2025. The following is a song inspired by this article.
Down the golden escalator man rode in, spoke of walls of fear, of who's to win. With every promise came a darker dream, turning empathy to rubble in his cruelty machine. This is Trump's cruelty machine, a grinding gear of hate unseen. Families shattered, futures torn apart, cold steel tearing hope from the heart. They strip rights from the struggling and poor, feed the rich while closing every door. From Medicaid to school lunch is gone, pain becomes policy, innocence undone. Inside Trump's cruelty machine, where fear is fuel and suffering's routine. A 6-year-old lost in a cell's cold glare, a man detained with no rightful care. Ice fans rolling at midnight's hush, silencing voices without any fuss. Empathy called weakness, faith turned to shame, while the billionaires cheer in their halls of flame. Deporting researchers who came to heal, turning workers' dreams into sealed-off fields. Children wail unheard through steel-barred scenes. A republic broken by the cruelty machine. This is Trump's cruelty machine, where power devours the unseen. But voices rise, outraged and loud, to reclaim justice, to stand unbowed. When compassion is weaponized and kindness is demonized, we break the gears, disrupt the scheme. We'll dismantle Trump's cruelty machine.
Early this month, ICE agents detained a 6-year-old Honduran boy battling leukemia as he left an immigration court in Los Angeles with his mother and sister. A child fighting for his life was ripped from his fragile medical routine and locked away for over a month, interrupting his treatment, crying himself to sleep night after night in a concrete cell instead of a hospital bed. This wasn't a mistake. It was cruelty by design, an intentional act of terror by a government that now treats compassion and weakness and suffering as a political weapon. ProPublica this morning published a report titled, quote, "Bloodied Faces, Sobbing Children. Immigration officers smash car windows to speed up arrests," end quote. Documenting massive use of physical violence, including over 50 occasions where car windows were smashed, and examples of people who were beaten up by masked anonymous ICE thugs. The reports call this level of police brutality, quote, "unprecedented," end quote, pointing out that no police agency has ever behaved like this prior to the Trump administration. The Guardian reports in an article titled, quote, "Georgia detainee with prosthetic legs who objected to flooded cell sent to solitary," end quote. Quote, "A Liberian man detained by ICE in Georgia was put in solitary confinement after complaining about flooding in his cell that he said was potentially dangerous for his electronic prosthetic legs. Since then, his challenges in detention have included the screws coming out of his prosthetic legs, causing him to fall and injure his hand, and being unable to obtain new fitted legs." Taylor was brought to the U.S. from Liberia by his mother on a medical visa when he was a small child. He went through 16 operations. He has 2 fingers on his right hand. Now 46, he has lived in the United States nearly his entire life, works as a barber, is active in promoting cancer awareness in his community, and got engaged only 10 days before ICE detained him in January. Despite having a pending application for U.S. residence, commonly known as a, quote, "green card," end quote, ICE detained and locked up Taylor in January, end quote. When Donald Trump descended that golden escalator 10 years ago and called Mexicans rapists and murderers, we should have known what was coming. What many mistook for bombast or political performance art in 2015 has since revealed itself to be something much darker. Cruelty as a political strategy, an ideology, and a governing philosophy. Here, on the first day of July in 2025, after 6 months of Trump's second term and with a full compliant of GOP marching behind him, it's undeniable. This is not incompetence or accidental malice. It is deliberate, strategic authoritarianism. Cruelty is not a bug in Trumpism. It is the central operating system, and it has become the organizing principle of today's Republican Party, as you can see from the glee with which Republican members of Congress strip rights and supports from vulnerable people, and right-wing media stars brag about ICE's brutal tactics. This administration's cruelty isn't just directed at migrants or protesters or the poor. It's aimed at democracy itself. When they normalize suffering, when they use state power to punish the vulnerable and reward the cruel, they erode everything that holds a pluralistic democracy together: the rule of law, institutional checks and balances, civic trust, and the belief at the foundation of every functional and successful society that, quote, "we're all in this together," end quote. For example, look at the, quote, "big beautiful bill," end quote, that Trump, Majority Leader John Thune, and House Speaker Mike Johnson rammed through Congress last month with much fanfare and zero Democratic support. They called it patriotic and pro-growth. In reality, it's one of the most draconian pieces of legislation ever passed in modern American history. It strips health care from over 23 million Americans by gutting the ACA's expansion, Medicaid expansion, throws up roadblocks to staying on Medicaid, and cuts subsidies to working families. It raises taxes on middle and lower income households by removing credits and deductions that working people rely on, even if as it slashes corporate income, and estate taxes for the morbidly rich. It slashes funding for Medicaid, food stamps, school lunches, Pell Grants, Head Start, and housing assistance. It cuts Medicare and accelerates the GOP's long-sought privatization of Medicare and Social Security. And then it turns around and hands over $4 trillion in tax cuts to the very billionaires who fund Trump's brutal machine. Trump and the billionaire boys club who got him elected are in his cabinet, including the same crew that reprogrammed their social media algorithms to favor the far right and suppress independent and progressive media, are now openly celebrating policy that will kill poor people. That isn't hyperbole. It's at the core of their political project made possible by the corrupt Citizens United Supreme Court decision. It's a project built on fear, exclusion, and the weaponization of difference. What began with chants of, quote, build a wall, end quote, has metastasized into a state-run deportation machine that operates like a fascist police force. ICE, now expanded and unaccountable, no longer just terrorizes undocumented immigrants. It raids sanctuary cities, surveils citizens who participate in protests, and detains people without charges in the name of, quote, national security, end quote. Under Trump's second term, ICE has become America's Gestapo. The word literally means, quote, secret police, end quote, just as it was in Germany. And like their 20th century predecessors, they operate by inspiring fear. In our case, with black vans, anonymous uniforms, hidden faces and badges, unrestrained violence, and warrantless searches. They're Trump's domestic terror squad, designed not to protect, but to intimidate, and answerable only to him. This isn't just authoritarianism. It's moral rot. Trump's cruelty is designed not only to consolidate power, but to distort our collective sense of right and wrong. For today's Republicans, empathy is now considered weakness. Kindness is called, quote, wokeness, end quote. Helping your neighbor is labeled, quote, socialism, end quote. Faith has been turned into a weapon for the powerful rather than a refuge for the weary. Jesus wept, and not metaphorically, when he saw the temple turned into a marketplace. What would he say now about supposedly Christian pastors praising a man who brags about sexual assault, pardons rapists and cop killers, and surrounds himself with grifters and predators? And let's not forget Jeffrey Epstein and the ongoing cover-up of the elites in his orbit. The man died in federal custody under suspicious circumstances. The list of powerful men who flew on his plane, visited his island, and knew of his crimes continued to grow. Yet the institutional GOP, which claims to be the party of morality, is silent. Worse than silent, they did not deflect, deny, and defend. They even shut down Congress to avoid having a vote on releasing the Epstein papers and videos. This is exactly what Jesus warned against in the Sermon on the Mount. The hypocrites who pray loudly in public, but are ravening wolves in secret. What morality is this? The GOP today wraps itself in the language of faith and family, but what they practice is cruelty, racism, misogyny, and hierarchy. They criminalize compassion, turning public school teachers, judges, social workers, and librarians into targets for harassment. They encourage neighbors to report each other. They celebrate vigilantism. They ban books, prosecute trans kids, and militarize the police, all while calling it, quote, freedom, end quote. And it's not just Trump. The entire Republican Party has reinvented itself in his image, from J.D. Vance, who once warned about Trump's destructiveness and now echoes his every word, to state governors outlawing drag shows while doing nothing about gun violence in their own schools. The cruelty, violence, and even the deaths of our school children are the feature. This political movement and the economic inequality it's caused through 44 years of Reaganism, gutting our middle class while making a handful of billionaires richer than any pharaoh or king in history, is corroding our social fabric. Families are being torn apart by deportation, addiction, and poverty. Communities are afraid to speak up or organize. Schools are underfunded, teachers frightened, parents angry and divided. Faith institutions are splintered, some radicalized into political cults, others silenced by fear of retribution. And through it all, the GOP blames the victims: poor people, immigrants, black activists, women seeking reproductive health care, for the problems Republicans themselves have created. Trump's America today is in decline, but it's not because we've become too compassionate. It's because we've allowed the morbidly rich to hoard wealth, the powerful to dodge responsibility, and the cruel to dominate the public square. And yet history tells us there's another way. Compassion is not weakness. It's the glue of civilization that has been throughout human history. FDR built the New Deal on compassion. LBJ built the Great Society and the moral imperative to lift up the least among us. Democrats fought against fierce Republican opposition for every major social advance in the last century. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, the minimum wage, voting rights, civil rights, safe food, women's rights, union rights, gay marriage, student loans, public education, free college. And the American people, time and again, chose compassion until the GOP figured out how to gerrymander, suppress, and lie their way into power. Reagan called poor people, quote, welfare queens, end quote. Gingrich told Americans to hate our own government. Trump put the knife in the back of democracy itself. But it doesn't have to end this way. We need a return to morality, not the fake, punitive, quote, morality, end quote, of the Christian right, but the genuine morality of justice, equality, and care that Jesus talked about, of feeding the hungry and welcoming the stranger, of binding up the brokenhearted and lifting the fallen. That is not, quote, radical leftism, end quote. It's the moral center of every faith, every humanist tradition, and the glue that holds together every decent society. Government isn't the only strong force large enough to address systemic injustice, and it should be used to heal, not harm. We must reclaim our government as the instrument of public good. We must reject the outrage politics of the GOP, the hate, the lies, the violence, and the bigotry, and recommit ourselves to the American promise of liberty and justice for all. Only 26% of eligible voters made Donald Trump president in 2024. That means 3 out of 4 Americans either didn't vote or voted against him. We are the majority, but we must act like it. Double-check your voter registration every month, especially if you live in a red state where Republican-led purges are removing people from the rolls by the hundreds of thousands as you're reading these words. They are afraid of your voice. They're afraid of your compassion. They're afraid that if you show up, their cruelty will lose. We are better than this complete repudiation of ideals, aspirations, and founding visions of America. And now, more than ever, we must prove it. Not with hashtags or thoughts and prayers, but with votes, with organizing, with moral clarity, and with the unshakable belief that in America, cruelty should never again become policy. Let's bring compassion and morality back to the center of American life, and demand that our elected representatives and those running for office do the same before it's too late. Pass it along.